So in the last video, we were talking about the types of conservation in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. These were the two conservations we were talking about. And in situ conservation, we have the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and in ex situ, we have botanical gardens, zoological parks, tissue culture, seed banks, and cryobank. So we are going to see this one by one. What are these? A few things you already know about, so a few things you might not know. So we are going to see each and everything one by one in the next few slides. So first, in situ conservation, we have the national parks. So in the national parks, these national parks are strictly monitored by the government. They are under the central government. And these national parks have a particular area. They have it is actually conserved for the flora and the faunas, and it is conserved by the government. So they are strictly reserved for the betterment of the wildlife. And forestry, grazing and cultivation is not permitted in the area. So even hunting or any other activity, any other human activity is not permitted in the area, and humans are not actually allowed in these areas. So they are strictly for the animals alone. So you can't own a private ownership of that area. You can't buy anything in that area. It's under government, and you can't do anything. It actually covers around 100 to 500 square kilometers, and not more than that probably. And they might have a single plant or an animal species which are preserved in that area. So it might be the national park can be allotted for one type of species. That is, one type of species or animals are conserved in that particular national park, or it can be many species of animals and plants, but mostly it will be conserved for only one particular plant or animal. So some examples are given in this the column. So Jim Corbett National Park has the Bengal tiger. So they conserve Bengal tiger in those national parks. It is in Uttarakhand, and it was established in 1936. Dudhwa National Park, it's in Uttar Pradesh in 1977. Gir National Park in Gujarat, Kanha National Park, and Sundarban National Park. So these are present in mostly North India. So all these are national parks which are conserved for maybe for one particular type, or along with it conserves many species of animals and plants. So in South India, coming to the South India, we have Gindi National Park, which is in Chennai. In Gulf of Mannar National Park, we have Ramanathapuram, Indira Gandhi National Park in Coimbatore, Mudumalai National Park in the Nilgiris, Mukurthi National Park in the Nilgiris again. So these are the national parks in South India, in Tamil Nadu, in the state of Tamil Nadu. So moving on to wildlife sanctuaries. So wildlife sanctuaries are very similar to national parks, but it is mainly for the animals. They don't concentrate on the plants, but whereas in the national parks they also concentrate on the plants, but in wildlife sanctuaries they actually concentrate on the animals. So here you can see human activity like harvesting, timber cultivation, for collection of forest products is actually allowed. So human activity are allowed in these areas where you can actually cultivate the products which are in the wildlife sanctuaries. And private ownership, you can actually own these wildlife sanctuaries. Private ownership are allowed. So even if the tourists are visited, then it is actually without disturbing the flora and fauna. The tourists are allowed in the wildlife sanctuaries. So Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary in Theni, Vandalur Wildlife Sanctuary in Chennai. So it is actually wildlife sanctuary, but we say it as a zoo, but it is actually a wildlife sanctuary which is in Chennai. Kalakad Wildlife Sanctuary in Tirunelveli, Grizzled Squirrel Wildlife Sanctuary in Virudhunagar, Vedantangal Wildlife Sanctuary in Kanchipuram. So all these are wildlife sanctuary in Tamil Nadu. So there is a difference. What are the difference between wildlife sanctuary and national parks? So not much of difference, but both are actually, the main aim of them is to preserve the flora and the fauna, and and without making them extinct or endangered, we are going to protect it. So wildlife sanctuaries are human activities are allowed, whereas in national parks human activities are not allowed. Main aim is to protect particular flora and fauna. Flora and fauna or any other objects of historical significance are protected. There are no fixed boundaries. The boundaries are fixed and defined. It is open to the general public, not usually open to the public. Sanctuaries are usually formed by the order of central or the state government, whereas national parks are formed by the state or central legislature. So usually in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, these national parks, they actually pass an act to preserve the national parks. But here in wildlife sanctuary, basically the central and the government itself, they can take action when it comes to wildlife sanctuary. A sanctuary can be upgraded to a national park, whereas a national park can be downgraded to a wildlife sanctuary. So the highest would be the national parks. Basically, in a national park, it is very strict. National park is very strict, and you can't do any activity over there. Whereas in wildlife sanctuary, you can actually, some rules are relaxed. So human activities are allowed. So this comes next to the national park. So wildlife sanctuary comes next to the national park. It can be upgraded, but national parks cannot be downgraded to wildlife sanctuaries. Moving on to the biosphere reserve. So this is the third one in the in situ conservation. So in the in situ conservation, the third one would be biosphere reserves. So biosphere reserves is basically, these reserves are like villages where people actually live along with the animals and the plants. So they basically, humans belong to that particular place. They are preserved, they are conserved in the biosphere reserve. So biosphere reserves are protected area where human activity, human population is also present with the animals, and they actually take the products from the animals as well as the plants. So they actually depend on the animals and the plants living there. That is called as the biosphere reserve. So the area of these places can be around 5,000 kilometers. They conserve the ecosystem, species and genetic resources. These areas are set up mainly for economic development. So when they set up these biosphere reserves, the government also has some take on it. They actually earn something from these biosphere reserves. They actually cultivate, produce, they take the goods, whatever present in the biosphere reserve. So the government also takes some taxes, they collect some taxes or anything. So this actually biosphere reserves, it's not like the national parks. So national parks are mainly to conserve the animals. So there is no gain for the government. But whereas in biosphere reserves, the government also gains something from the biosphere reserves. That's the difference. Nanda Devi, which is in UP, Nokrek is in Meghalaya, Manas, Assam, Sundarbans, West Bengal, Gulf of Mannar, Tamil Nadu, Nilgiri, Tamil Nadu, Great Nicobar, and Similipal in Andaman and Nicobar, that is, or Orissa. So all these are biosphere reserves, which are they're protected. Basically, there are not much of development you can see in these areas. They won't develop much. They won't actually cut down the trees, or they don't build a lot of buildings there. So these are because they have to conserve the species over there. So that's why not much of development you can see in these areas. So what are the advantages of the conservation? So species can be adapted to their habitat. Species can interact with each other. A natural habitat is maintained. It is less expensive and easy to manage. Needs of indigenous people are protected. So these are the advantages of the in situ conservation, where you actually place the animals and the plants in their own habitat, and then you preserve it. So these are the advantages. You actually maintain them in the same habitat. So it's easy for us, right? It's easy for us. Not much of hard work is required. Not much of maintenance is required. You just have to preserve it from human activity. That's it. So that's the advantage. Moving on to ex situ conservation. So here we can see in ex situ conservation, we have botanical gardens, zoological parks, tissue culture, seed bank, and cryobank. So what are these? So botanical gardens, you know, I think most of you would have visited these botanical gardens. So these are gardens where the flowers, fruits, and vegetables are preserved. So they actually, you know, cultivate. There are some gardeners, they cultivate these plants and trees, and they're also, you know, they also allow the visitors, you know, to visit these botanical gardens. They conserve the plants and plant species, you know, away from their habitat. So they take it away from the habitat and they conserve it in a place, and visitors can visit these gardens. In zoological parks, that is the zoos, again the animals are, you know, bought from their own habitat and preserved in some other habitat, and visitors are also allowed in these zoological parks. So in India there are 800 zoos. So that's the fact, it seems. So they just put the fact over there. Next is tissue culture. Tissue culture is a technique which is done in lab. So this is basically done by the scientist. This is a technique which is used by the scientists to preserve these plants or even sometimes animals. So in tissue culture, what they do is they grow plant cells and tissue of the organs and seeds in a sterile environment on a nutrient media. So they actually place you know, the tissues of plants and animals in a media where it can grow, and they can produce an organism itself, a whole organism itself. So that is called tissue culture, and they you know, make the environment of the natural, they try to take the outside environment and try to produce that kind of environment artificially in a lab. So they actually provide sunlight for the plants to grow, for the tissue of the plant to grow. They provide nutrient media, all the medias to grow. So these tissues can grow, and they become, in the lab condition, they incubate it, and they can become an organism in the lab condition itself. So when they do this, it's actually easy for them to preserve endangered species. Even if these endangered species are going to extinct, they can bring back these endangered species back. They can actually save them from extinction. So that's the point of tissue culture. That's where science comes into place to conserve these organisms. So seed bank is where you preserve the dried seeds and store it in low temperature. And you preserve the seeds, and whenever it's necessary, you take the seeds and thaw it and produce the plant out of it. So the biggest seed bank in the world is in England, and it is called Millennium Seed Bank. So that's the biggest seed bank which is in England. Cryobank. So cryobank is nothing but they use a technique called cryopreservation. So cryopreservation is they store anything. They can actually store anything at low temperature. That is called cryopreservation. So the temperature is minus 196 degrees Celsius. That's not 196 degrees Celsius. That's minus. The minus just went on the top. So that's minus 196 degrees Celsius. In liquid nitrogen, they preserve. Anything can be preserved in that temperature. The seeds or the embryos, they can preserve at low temperature. Anything can be preserved. The embryos of the plants or the animals, anything can be preserved. So this is used for, so again cryopreservation is used to save the species from extinction. So you place these embryos, and so that when it is necessary, they can produce an organism out of the cryobank. So that's called cryobank, where cryobank is where they store these cryopreserved embryos or the seeds at low temperature. So this is ex situ conservation. Moving on to the advantages. What are the advantages? It prevents the decline of the species. Endangered animals can be breeded in these ways. Threatened species are breeded and released in natural environment. It is used for conducting research and scientific work. So all these would be the advantages of ex situ conservation. Alright, which we already discussed, to preserve the species from extinction basically. So moving on to PBR, People's Biodiversity Register. So we read about the red data book in the last class. It's very similar to the red data book. The PBR is People's Biodiversity Register, where it again maintains local plants and animal species basically. So it's just a register which has the information of all the local or the bioresources, basically bioresources locally which is present. So just reading through the first point, it is a document which contains comprehensive information on locally available bioresources, including landscape and demography of a particular area or village. So basically, when you take red data book, they have the information of the plants and animals which are there in that particular area. So they don't have microorganisms, remember. But here in PBR, they have the plants and animals, and also the landscape, the local landscape, and also the demography. Landscape and the demography, how what is present in which land or which area. So they also have the information about the land itself. So particular area or a village. So they show information of this also. So bioresources, what are these bioresources? So bioresources like plants, animals, and microorganisms. They have the information of microorganisms also. And the byproducts which actually essential for the human welfare. So they actually have the information of that particular animal or the plant which can produce what byproduct they can give for the humans, and they have the information about that also. So according to Biological Diversity Act in the year 2002, a biodiversity management committee is set up in each local body. So according to this act, a biodiversity management body, locally it has to be present in each local body, in a village or a town or a city. It has to be present according to this act. This committee, what is the main purpose of this committee which has been formed? Now this PBR registers with the guidance. So this committee prepares the register, the PBR register, and with the help of the technical support from the National Biodiversity and the State Biodiversity Board. So both with hand in hand, the State Biodiversity as well as the National Biodiversity, they prepare this PBR, Biological Diversity Register. They prepare this PBR. That's the purpose of this Biological Diversity Act, or the Biological Diversity Management committee which is present in each village or town or city. Okay, that's that. So this committee will promote conservation, preservation of the habitats and breed of animals, and gathering of knowledge relating to biological diversity. So this you can understand. So they basic, what we are studying here is conservation. So the basic use of this committee is to conserve. They prepare the habitats and they breed the animals. The register entails a complete documentation of biodiversity in the area related to the plant, food source, wildlife, medicinal source, traditional knowledge, etc. Okay, so they have the complete documentation about everything: plant, food source, wildlife, medicinal plants, all these things they have the register. So it is basically easy for the government and also for the people to know, also for the scientists who are researching in that area. Moving on to biomagnification. This lesson is full of theories. Oh God, this is too much of talking is necessary, and there is no proper, point-to-point information. It's too much of theory. Oh God. Okay, moving on to biomagnification. Just bear with me. It's actually kind of too much of information at one shot. Just take a break and be back to and start the video again. So it's too much. I know too much of saturation is happening here. Okay, so biomagnification is the increase in contaminated substances due to intoxicating environment. Okay, biomagnification is basically is a measure. It's basically what we call biomagnification is the measure of the increase in the pollution which is happening. So, or the chemical substance which is contaminating the environment. So that is called biomagnification. So any substance which is polluting the environment and it keeps on increasing. There is no decrease. So that is called biomagnification. What are these pollutants then? What are the pollutants which is in the environment that causes the biomagnification? So they are heavy metals such as mercury, arsenic, and pesticides such as polychlorinated biphenyls and DDT, diphenyl trichloroethane. So these are fertilizers and pesticides which are commonly used in by the farmers throughout the world. So these are the pollutants which actually pollute the soil. It causes land pollution. And when these pollutants are washed away by water, they actually mix with water also. So they are present both in land. Whatever we eat, it's present, and whatever we drink, it's present. So all these pollutants are mixing with the food which we are eating. So as humans are in the top level in the food chain, we depend on the plants as well as the animals for food. Now these pollutants causes direct impact on the plants and animals which are dependent on them. So because we actually cook, we are humans which we can differentiate from bad to wrong, but these animals and plants, they actually depend directly on the soil and on the water which are polluted, and the animals just drink the water. They don't heat the water, they don't boil the water, they eat the food raw. So what happens is when they are eating these things and they are in the low level of the food chain, and when humans consume these animals and plants, we are also affected by the pollutants. So these food will enter through their food, and then as we are in the higher food chain, we keep on consuming the foods, we keep on consuming the toxins, and this get accumulated in our body in a time period. When it keeps on accumulating in the body, it will lead to a lot of health issues. So maybe cancer. So cancer and so many issues it will create. So what are the causes for biomagnification? As I told you, over use of fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, they're very toxic to the soil, for the environment. It causes health issues. So that's why this is the reason. Organic contaminants cause adverse impact on the health of the human, animals, and wildlife. Industrial activities. So industries, if you have industries around, where do they put all those waste products? So they actually mix it with the water. Like the companies, like the Coca-Cola companies, the multinational companies, whatever they are producing, they just throw everything in the water or in the land, and they contaminate the environment. So all these industries are, polluting the environment more than the people. The industries actually release a lot of toxic substances. So they enter the food chain now, and this leads to biomagnification. So mining activities. Activities like gold and for diamonds, coal especially. So all these are going to pollute the environment. They're going to pollute the air. They're polluting the land, because when you dig up the soil, you actually end up releasing some unpleasant substances from the earth. So like sulfide and selenium, they deposit on the water, and again when we drink, it is toxic to the body. So all these are the reasons for biomagnification. What will be the effects? Effects would be it will impact on humans, like I just told you about cancer, kidney problems, liver failure, birth defects, respiratory disorder, and heart diseases. Everything, it's just going to affect each and every organ in your body basically. It also affects the reproduction and development of marine organisms. The destruction of coral reefs affects the lives of many aquatic animals. So coral reefs are very sensitive to pollution. So the coral reefs are actually declining. So these coral reefs are actually living, which are present in the underwater, and these reefs, many aquatic organisms depends on these reefs for shelter, food, everything, and these are declining. the chemicals and toxins which are released into the water bodies disrupt the food chain. So I think the points are very clear here. Whatever we discussed, they are saying. So these are the effects that are going to happen due to biomagnification. Okay. So we have come to the last part of the chapter. So we are going to see about animal welfare organizations. Two important animal welfare organizations we are going to see. So animal welfare organizations can be like NGOs or can be government organizations. It can be either private or government. So these are group of people, these are volunteers. They are concerned about the health of the animals and the safety of the animals, and they create an organization to support these animals. They include animal rescue groups, which help the animals in distress, and others which will help the animals suffering from some epidemic. So they basically help the animals. So these welfare organizations help the animals. They are non government. That can be NGOs or government organizations. The first one we are going to see about Blue Cross, and the next we are going to see about CPCA. So these two are animal welfare organizations. I'm just going to read it from the book because it's too much of theory, too much to read through. Oh God. Okay. Where is the Blue Cross? Okay, so Blue Cross is a registered animal welfare charity in United Kingdom. So it was first formed in United Kingdom in the year 1897, and it was called as Our Dumb Friends League. So it was actually started, I think it was actually started as a joke, and it became a huge organization which they never knew, I think. So they never would have thought it's going to become a big organization. So they started as Our Dumb Friends League, and the vision of this charity is every pet, every pet should have a home for itself. Every animal should have a home for itself. So basically, it was concentrating on the pets. Okay, so it was basically concentrating on the pets, and they should have a happy home. So that's what the main goal of the Blue Cross. But now they are actually doing a lot of services for the animals now. They protect their lives. They actually do a lot of stuff. And they actually treat the animals over there. They have doctors there. So it has grown into a big organization. In India, especially in Chennai, it was started in the year 1957 and by Captain V. Sundaram. So he was an Indian pilot who started this organization in India, and he was an Indian pilot and an animal welfare activist. And so I think you know a lot of stuff about Blue Cross. The Blue Cross of India has received several international and national awards. This organization is entirely looked after by volunteers now. The main office is located in Guindy in Chennai. So Chennai is the main office. In Chennai, in Guindy, it has the main office, and it has hospitals and shelters and ambulance services, everything they have. And the organizations include providing shelters, rehoming, adoption, animal birth control, maintaining hospitals and mobile dispensary, and providing ambulance services. So all these are done by the Blue Cross, and the head is in Chennai, Guindy. Okay, CPCA. CPCA stands for the Committee for the Purpose of Control and Supervision of Experiments on Animals. So basically, CPCA, in short, I'm going to tell you, CPCA basically, from the name itself, you can see it will supervise and controls the experiments on the animals. So if you are a scientist, and you have to experiment a product, and you actually end up experimenting on the animals basically. So because before the humans take it, it has to be experimented somewhere. So the closest would be experimenting on animals. Now when the animals suffer during this process, the animals are tested, like the lab rats, especially the lab rats and other animals. They also test on other animals also, not only the lab rats. Now, when they test the products on these animals, like cosmetics or medicines or from some pharmaceutical products, the animals suffer and sometimes they die because of it. Most of them die. So this committee is going to put some rules on how to test on these organisms. They're not banning from animal testing. They don't ban it because animal testing, it is necessary, because humans have big hand in it. Like, we need animal testing before taking any product which is going to harm us if you don't test it on something. They don't ban from animal testing, but they actually provide guidelines for the scientists on how to proceed an experiment, how to do experiment on the animals. So okay. So this was a committee set up under the Prevention of Cruelty of Animals Act in 1960. So when this act was passed, this committee was formed so that animal testing can be done in a controlled manner. It has been functioning since 1991 to ensure that animals are not subjected to unnecessary suffering during experiments on them. Basically, experimenting on any animal would be really it will be a suffering, they will suffer because of that. But so they actually put rules on what is too much of suffering and less suffering. So I think that's the purpose of that, I think. All right. So what are the objectives of CPCA? So to avoid unnecessary pain before and after experiment. Okay, I'm not sure what is unnecessary pain and necessary pain. Sorry. Okay, so what is, I don't know what is pain, what is the unnecessary pain and necessary pain. So they avoid unnecessary pain. Okay, it will be painful for the animals, of course, when you're experimenting. Actually, they put injections, they feed the rats, lot of stuff. They inject so many stuff inside them. So all these are painful processes for the animal. And but basically, it should not suffer too much. The animals should not suffer too much because of it. And nowadays, so many organizations are against animal testing. Basically, now so many organizations have formed. They are completely against animal testing, and they don't support animal testing at all because of the suffering they go through while they're experimenting on the animals. So next is to promote the human care of animal used in experiments. Okay, when you are experimenting on animals, you care for the animals. So to promote the care which is necessary for the animals, so this committee will look over the experiments. To provide guidelines for animals' housing, breeding, and maintenance. So how they also provide guidelines for the animals when you're breeding an animal. Like if you have a farm, like a dairy farm, a cattle farm, or a poultry farm, whatever farm you have, they actually give guidelines how these farms has to be set up, how these farms have to be maintained. So anything you are setting up, any farm you're setting up, then you have to maintain the guidelines set by the CPCA. To promote the human care of animal used in biomedical and behavioral research and testing. All right, they also set up, I told you, so they set up guidelines for the animal use in the biomedical and behavioral research and testing. So whatever animals which are used for testing purpose in a lab, biomedical, behavioral research, all these things, they set up guidelines for it. So there are rules like you should do this and you should not do that with the animal. So you can subject the animal to this and not to that. So many things are there. So functions of CPCA: approval of animal house facilities, permission for conducting experiments involving usage of animals. So you have to, before experimenting on animal, in a lab, I'm talking about a lab as a scientist. So you need to take permission from this committee before you start experimenting, and also it has to go through a lot of scrutiny basically before you ask even a lab rat to experiment on it. because I have worked in a lab, I knew that. So it's not really easy to work with animals. It's not really easy to ask or get a permission to work on animals. And it actually takes a very long time, for a very long processing for that. So it's not really easy. To read through is really easy, but it's not. So action against establishment in case of established violation. So now they are going to take action. If you're not following the rules, they are going to take action. They also do that. So registration of establishments conducting animal experimentation or breeding of animals for this purpose. Okay. So they also registration. So you have to register before. In this community, you have to go to this community register. And if you're actually doing a farm, if you want a farm, if you want to set up a farm, you have to get permission from this committee before you register the farm. So all these things are done by this committee. Okay. Yes, I think this lesson is over. Yeah. Okay, done with this. Done with the third term now. So students, I think you just have to go through the process. You have to go through the lesson. It's a big lesson, I know. Too much of theory, too much of things to read through, too much of names to remember, I know. So you have to do a lot of hard work in this chapter. It's a big chapter. So if you have any questions, please do ask me. I'm happy to clear your doubts. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being patient. And I'm going to see you in the Zoom class, next Zoom class. Thank you, students.